Enjoy, guys. Have fun.
We're on.
Neutral.
We're on.
We are live.
All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us here at the U.S. Embassy in Berlin. It's my pleasure and my honor to have a great panel here tonight for a discussion on diversity and diplomacy. First of all, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping things. One, we'll take questions at the end of the session. You can submit your questions through Facebook or YouTube, whichever medium you're using. And a couple other things. On March 30th, the embassy plans on doing a chat with the State Department's Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, Ambassador Abercrombie Stanley. So please tune into that. And the final thing before I turn it over to our keynote speaker is we hope to do a showing of the PBS docuseries, The American Diplomat. And so stay tuned for that as well. It's about 3 African-American diplomats. So, getting on with the show, I want to introduce our keynote speaker, Consul General from Hamburg. He's a senior foreign service officer, career diplomat, Darion Akins. He's been in Germany for almost 3 years. Almost 3 years. Before his assignment in Germany, Darion was in the executive office of the Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs and International Organizations. So with that, I'll hand it over to Darion.
Thank you, Salman. I really appreciate it. I will start my remarks with a story, because I like telling stories. And so let me just set the scene. So it's 1985, and it was my first day of high school. And this day differed from the first day of my prior years in that I would have been playing football. But this year I had decided as I was entering high school that I wasn't going to play football. I wanted to focus on my grades and making sure that I would get into a good university and, God willing, get a scholarship to do it. And so I was very focused on that, and so I decided I'm not going to play football. But now you have to know, I grew up in Texas, and in Texas, every young boy plays football. This is just what we do because we believe it builds character. And so I had a coach who didn't see things quite the way that I did, and that led to this exchange that I'll share with you now. So remember, it was my first day of high school, and I had decided I'm not going to play football. And I hear, Akins! It was my coach. What's this I hear about you not playing football? I said, yes, sir. I decided I'm not going to play football this year. I really have to focus on my grades and my coursework, make sure that I get into a good university. You don't have to worry about your grades. C's are good enough. You don't need to excel at any grade work. You're going to play football. I said, no, sir, I'm not going to play football. And by the way, would you tell your son that? He said, well, you're not my son. And I said, exactly. Now, I was young and not the diplomat that I am today. So I couldn't filter everything. All I knew at that particular moment is that I didn't feel quite supported. And I knew that something was wrong, but I didn't know exactly what was wrong. And over the years, I've been able to process it. And here's the conclusion that I came to. My coach was correct. I wasn't his son, and he did not have a responsibility to me as his son. But he did have an institutional responsibility as a coach and as a teacher. So let's talk about that just for a second. What's a coach? I wrote this down so I wouldn't forget. A coach is someone who assists student athletes to achieve their potential and inspires positive self-esteem. They build character, a healthy respect for competition, and the idea of continuous improvement. And what's a teacher? A teacher is someone who motivates, inspires, and empowers a student to endeavor to be a lifelong learner. These were institutional responsibilities that were incumbent upon my coach to fulfill, and he failed. And why am I telling you this story? I'm telling you because it's relevant to today. In that in the Foreign Service, we also have institutional responsibilities. And if we are serious about building an institution that is diverse, that is reflective of our society, then we need to consider our institutional responsibilities. And that's what I want to talk to you about. So as a leader, as a manager, as a supervisor, we all have institutional responsibilities. We have a responsibility to identify talent, to promote talent, to empower employees to strengthen the organization. And it must be done with intentionality. This is not by accident. It has to be with purpose, because we're trying to create productive, diverse teams that will benefit the organization. Now, prior to assuming my position as the Consul General in Hamburg, I worked, as Salman said, in the executive office in EUR. I was the HR division chief, primarily responsible for staffing our overseas missions. What I was particularly, a large portion of my portfolio was the deputy chief of missions process and identifying senior staff members who would be members of our overseas country teams. And here was what I thought about. The way I explained how we wanted to achieve diverse teams is this. I said, it would horrify me if I went to a country team meeting and everyone in that meeting was in agreement, that there was no diversity of opinion, that everyone said, yep, absolutely, that's correct. Then I would say we failed in our primary responsibility to advise the ambassador, to give an ambassador the full breadth from A to Z about the issues that we face. And that's what we have to do today. We have to work with this intentionality to build country teams, to build our staff overseas so that it's not only reflective of our societies, but is done in a way that is productive for the organization and creates an effective organization. And that's why councils like the Diversity, Inclusion, and Equities Council, that's why they're critical to this, because they are the ones who will ensure that we are responsible to the institution, that we uphold our institutional responsibilities. Only by doing that can we be successful. So let me end with this. Here's my challenge to all of us. As managers, as supervisors, as leaders, we should endeavor to be great coaches and teachers. We should assist our colleagues and employees to achieve their potential, to motivate them, to inspire them, to empower them to build a stronger institution that serves our citizens and our country, not for the sake of diversity, but for the sake of being better, striving to be better. So in this, strive with me to be better. Thank you.
Thanks, Darion. Before we move on, I want to just do a quick introduction of our panelists. And I'll start with Latifa Hassan. She's a family nurse practitioner here at the U.S. Embassy in Berlin with over 20 years experience as a board-certified family practice medical provider. Next to Latifa is Carly Ross, who's a political officer here at the U.S. Embassy in Berlin, and she covers Iran issues. And next to me is Aaron Hashimi. He's a German diplomat at the Federal Foreign Office, the Auswärtiges Amt, and he's currently on a task force for organizational development. Jamal Williams, customer service representative here at the U.S. Embassy in Berlin, and a former Marine. And then on screen we have Tiaji Sio, who is actually back in our country at Harvard doing a fellowship, and also a German diplomat. Welcome, Tiaji. So, moving on. Thank you for that story, Darion. That was I honestly wasn't sure where you were going to go with that. I had some thoughts, and I'm glad you didn't go where I thought you might go with it. But it was an excellent
pulled it
story.
together?
You did. You
All
pulled
right,
it
good.
together
There
like
we
a
go.
good Foreign Service officer. I want to start with Tiaji, actually. And if you could maybe tell us about your professional, personal/professional experience getting into the German Foreign Service, growing up in Germany, and what was that experience like as a minority in Germany?
Sure. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
I'm from Frankfurt originally, which is a very diverse city. I went to a high school in which people from different origins where 80 different languages were spoken at home. So it was quite a diverse experience. And then I applied to the Foreign Service Academy during high school. There's an undergrad program at the Service Academy. I got in and was really excited to start. And then I was actually pretty quickly a little disappointed that the diversity I was used to from my hometown, Frankfurt, wasn't really represented in my new job in the Foreign Service. And especially as I looked up the hierarchy, I realized that people that looked like me were not represented. And so I think we're going to come to this later on, but this kind of triggered forming a group of like-minded people who also saw this as a challenge.
So, just quick follow-up. So what made you decide to join the Foreign Service? Did you know about the, for lack of a better word, the lack of diversity in the German Foreign Service at the time?
Actually, no. I think growing up, to me, it was completely normal to be in a class surrounded by people who come from different parts of the world, who speak different languages. So I was used to it, and I was really interested in foreign policy. Back in high school, I used to be a part of the European Youth Parliament. I attended Model United Nations conferences, and I really wanted my passion to become my future career. So without hesitation, I applied, hoping that I would pass the requirements of the tests. And I got into the program. But looking forward, I didn't really regard my countries of origin, which are in Liberia, Guinea, and Germany, to be an obstacle.
Excellent. Aaron, what's your story?
It's my story. So I grew up in a small town in the far west of Germany, not far from the Dutch border actually, and I do remember that I actually came across the feeling of being othered when I was about 5 or 6 years old, because I was playing in a group of kids, and then people were looking at me and kind of pointing me out, and I was thinking, what is it? And then later on, somebody tried to explain to me that my name was not like everybody else's name, and I was thinking, what exactly are they referring to? So those were the 80s, and indeed Germany wasn't as diverse a society as it is nowadays. And yet, as we've just heard from Tiaji, if you look at German governmental bodies and institutions, you still do not see that many people who would, refer to generally as visible members of minority communities. And I find that quite surprising because, especially you live here in Germany and you're in Berlin, in a big city, or in Hamburg. But even if you go to smaller cities, you see that German society nowadays is just as diverse as any other Western European society. And this is, Tiaji, how we actually then decided to do something about it, meeting at the Federal Foreign Office and saying, we should actually do something for empowerment of also to actually encourage young people to say, well, yeah, I have what in Germany is called being a person of a migratory background. So that's a very technical term to put it. Quite German, I think, culturally
Yes.
appropriate. Yeah. And so that's really what we're doing with our group Diplomats of Color at the Federal Foreign Office. So we're trying to encourage young people to actually say, all right, I can't really see that many people who, I would say look like me, or that I see certain similarities, but yet I'll give it a try and I'll apply. I'll try to go for one of those jobs. And as you, Darion, were just mentioning, so we're trying to be coaches in that regard.
Yeah, and I would say, as Tiaji was saying, I grew up in Germany, but most of my life I spent in the U.S. Very diverse, in a very diverse school as well, just like you described. Never thought twice about people of color or anything like that. And then I joined the Foreign Service, and all of a sudden it was a different world, honestly, because it wasn't as diverse as what I thought was our country. I'd like to get Latifa and Carly's thoughts on that too, because I think you've been around in the Foreign Service longer, but Carly and I have been in almost the same amount of time.
So my journey, well, first of all, my early formative years was in Nigeria. Lagos, Nigeria is where I had my earliest years. My dad was actually a locally employed staff of the United States Embassy. So great. And I think about age 25, I immigrated to the US then. Nice, diverse community. There was no stopping me. I wanted to be in the medical field, and I was going to do this. And always at the back of my mind, I would say, well, I'm sure there's a path for me in the Foreign Service, but not yet. And so somewhere, after being in my field for about 10 years, the opportunity presented itself. And I went ahead, I applied, and got accepted. And then when I joined the Foreign Service, just like Salman said, it was like, okay, there's not too many people who look like me. And then I was like, okay, well, maybe this is just my perception, I should give it time. I've been with the State Department for about 13 years now, and when I look up the ranks, the story is still true. But what I always tell myself is that there were people who were before me, who had the same challenges, the same issues. They did something about it. My experiences have been mixed. I've had great mentors, not just people of color, also people that are Caucasians. And so what I tell myself is, I'm going to do something. I'm not just going to sit down and fold my arms. I'm going to do something, whatever I can do to represent the minorities and also to help people that are thinking about this career. Because what I found out when I started recruiting is the first thing they asked me was, how did you get into the Foreign Service? Did you know someone? I'm like, I didn't know anybody. I was sitting at my kitchen table applying, and I said, you could do it. But when I go to the recruiting events, what I notice, and I tell my colleagues in the Med Department this, is most people of color, they wouldn't walk up to that table if there's nobody who looks like them. So I said, I'm ready for recruiting. If you need me, call me. And I did a lot of that for about a year and a half. And I noticed that people would gravitate naturally towards me. And then I'm able to tell them about the opportunities and maybe dispel some of the myths and say, yeah, it's still happening, but if you join me, you can make a difference. So this is where I find myself now. So, yeah.
Carly.
Well, I was actually sort of recruited to the Foreign Service, if you will, through a fellowship program that exists to attract more diverse staff into the Foreign Service, specifically because of the challenges that we're here talking about today, on the retention side, I think, as well. And that fellowship was called the Pickering Fellowship. It was actually created by an ambassador, late Ambassador Edward Perkins, who has a very special place in the Foreign Service, and especially on issues of diversity and inclusion, because he was one of the first African American ambassadors in the U.S. Foreign Service. And like Latifa said, those who came before us have really, pushed on harder doors. I think we still have challenges, but have helped to make it better for the next generation, including Ambassador Perkins by way of creating this Pickering Fellowship. And this fellowship, I should note, doesn't only seek to attract those from a different ethnic or racial background, which, those are important elements of diversity, certainly, but also gender diversity, diversity of religion, geographic diversity. There are definitely, I would say, in our foreign service in the United States, parts of our country that are underrepresented in the foreign service. And so this program also seeks to address diversity kind of under a broader definition. And I think, even though we're focused again on ethnicity and race in this conversation more, there's a lot as a woman in the foreign service or a mother in the foreign service that I think the institution needs to continue to work on to make sure that we hold on to those people, because as has been said, the diversity of perspectives really makes our institutions stronger, and I think equips us to face the important foreign policy challenges that we are confronting today. So.
Yeah. Jamal, you have a little bit of a different story because you were in the Marines.
Yep.
Be curious to hear what you have to say about the challenges or the path that you took to the Marines and maybe the challenges that you faced. And now that you live in Germany, do you see some of those comparisons here?
So where I start, my dad was in the military, and I was bouncing around a lot as a kid. After my parents separated, that's when I finally settled in Florida. That's where my mom pretty much raised us on her own. I had a few brothers on my side as well. But around the age of 17, when I had to start making decisions, I knew one decision was for sure. I wasn't going to go to college right away. Kind of going back to Darion's opening with maintaining that C average, that was more of my focus, so I can actually play the sports that I wanted to do, and focus more on that, because of course focusing on your grades and focusing on school were almost two different things for most kids, most teenagers. So I knew that wasn't going to be a thing. I knew I didn't want to stay home with mom. And I knew I wanted to get out and travel, and I knew the military would provide me that option. And having my older brother join the military, he was in the Army. My dad, of course, with his experience, probably had an influence on my ultimate decision to join the Marines. As soon as we were done with the recruit training at the beginning, going into the schoolhouse, they gave us an option to either go to 2 stateside locations or you can go overseas. And of course, I was excited by the opportunity to go overseas. I would say the majority of my peers were saying, oh, I want to go to California because that's closer to Arizona, or I want to go to North Carolina. I'm like, you guys, why? Okay, fair enough. I guess I'm a different person that I want to go to Japan and see the world a little bit. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made. I came to a crossroads around my re-enlistment time frame, and the opportunity presented itself to work as a Marine security guard. And that's where my foreign service journey started. I began to meet a lot of people upon my first post. They kind of brought me back down to earth because one person actually knocked at the door to introduce herself. And she says, hey, what's your name? I said, Corporal Williams. There's a placard sitting right outside. And she says, no, what's your name? And I said, oh, Jamal. And then she's like, welcome to Turkey. And I said, oh, wow, okay. That was kind of a, popping the bubble moment. And I just said, oh, wow, there is, from that point I felt like, okay, this actually could be something that's for me later on down the road. I had just re-enlisted at the time, so I had 4 years to think and say, oh, man. But at the same time, I would have never been presented with that opportunity if I hadn't gone that path in the first place. So that's where my thirst started. And of course, there's a lot of in between that eventually brought me to here, to this place where I just started back. It feels like I belong here. Yeah, it's nice to be back.
Great. Aaron, if I can come back to you. Sure. You talked about the program that you were part of initiating, the Diplomats of Color. Mm-hmm. What is it that you hope that will accomplish in not just the Federal Foreign Office, but in Germany as a whole? Is there an aspect of it that's part of outreach to recruit more diverse, candidates for the Foreign Service, or is it more focused internally to try to bring about certain changes within the Auswärtiges Amt?
It's really both.
Okay.
So we're trying to do one of these things and then to achieve actually the other one. So we're trying to raise awareness within our ministry and tell people, just look at demographics in Germany. Those of you who've been in Germany for a long time, you know that there's a huge proportion of the population that actually is of Turkish origin. You look at our service and you look, through the ambassadorial ranks, and you think, okay, statistically speaking, 3 or 4 of those should have a Turkish-sounding name, and then you realize that there's 0. So we're trying to just, hint at these facts and say, look, German society nowadays is more diverse, so we actually have to go out as a ministry and talk to the different communities. Just like Latifa was saying, if there's nobody there at the job fair who looks like them, then it's still this old but very true slogan that's actually originally from the feminist context, I think. You can be what you can see. So we're encouraging our own ministry to do this, and luckily so far we founded our network Diplomats of Color in 2019. So it's a rather young topic for our ministry. But so far the political leadership is very responsive, and they listen to what we suggest and what we think could be done. And so step by step, we actually are getting there. So we start developing certain partnerships with foundations who are actually trying to do, Darion, what you were saying in the very beginning, to be coaches and actually also reach out to communities and tell people, of course, you can achieve what you want to achieve in your life. You just have to set your goal right. And we start working with them and asking them, well, do you have people who would like to come and do an internship, for instance, at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? And so step by step, I think we can actually really, let's say, get a more get more representation into public service. And I believe that in times when, let me put it that way, democracy isn't the only concept that is out there in the world. It is very important that our public institutions and government bodies are inclusive and get the greatest legitimacy out of it possible.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I think that Chaji can also tell us a little bit about her experience in recruitment efforts and what's the response from people who come from different communities that we speak to.
Please, Tiaji. And anyone, please, just jump in where you want. We're having a conversation, so.
Sure, I think this is something we as Diplomats of Color have been very surprised about, that ever since we got more attention, both from the Foreign Service but also by the media, we noticed that we get emails and messages quite frequently of people that feel encouraged because they all of a sudden feel represented. Just to give you one example, there was a young law student whose parents are both from Togo, but he was born and raised in Germany. He holds German citizenship. And he always wanted to become an ambassador one day, but he never really felt that he could. And then he read an article about Diplomats of Color in the newspaper, and then that gave him the courage and the motivation to actually follow through with his dreams. And I think this is just one of many stories, many examples that show how important representation is, both externally but also internally, for our leadership to know where they should be focusing on.
Yeah. Darion, you talked about institutions initially a little bit. You've been in the State Department for a long time.
20 years.
20 years, there you go. Internally, looking at us, and stepping away from our recruitment efforts for a minute, because we have work to do there as well. But internally, where do you think we continue to have challenges when it comes to diversity and inclusion? And that's just broadly speaking, not just for us generalists or civil servants, but overall, where do you see some of the challenges, and how do you think we can address those?
No, it's a very good, insightful question. The biggest challenge that I see is that we are not consistent in our explanation of why this is important and why it's a priority. We speak to it. We'll say, yeah, well, of course diversity is important because America's diverse. Okay. And then when you get inside the State Department and you start working with your colleagues will question you about this and ask the question, well, I don't understand. Why is it necessary? I can do this job, you can do this job. It shouldn't have anything to do about our particular backgrounds. And the institution does not have a response to that institutionally. And the institution also, unfortunately for us, changes their answer periodically. So when I first came in, it was not so much about diversity. It was like, we want really good individuals who are committed to carrying out U.S. policy. But of course, there was this underlying effort to bring in diversity, but we didn't really talk about it. And over time, we named it, we said diversity, but as an institution, we have not been clear. And so here is how I would be clear about this. As an institution, we have to say what I said, because of course I'm right about this, is when we're talking about diversity, we know from studies that if I want a very effective team that will consider an issue in depth and look at it from A to Z, I am more likely to end up with an effective team that comes up with the best optimal solution if it's a diverse team. And that everyone, and there's another key here, that everyone has to be willing to share their point of view. Not be afraid, not be intimidated, but say what you have to say. This is not about being right or wrong. This is about getting a perspective on the table so that we can arrive at an optimal solution. And it's only when we're able to do that that we're going to be able to move forward as an institution, and we have to explain it from that perspective. Let me quickly touch on one of the things I've seen, and this is something that we have to be cognizant of and guard against. One of the challenges is that when we start talking about diversity, those who are not inclined to support it will say, great, then we need every type of diversity. And they'll tell you 85 different groups that you need to have, and if you're not going to support all of those groups, then why are we going to have this? And it's a false flag. That's missing the point. And this is why the institution has to come back and reinforce, no, this is the reason why we believe in this institutionally. This is the reason why it will make us a better organization. This is why it will make us more effective at carrying out foreign policy, and be able to articulate that from bottom to top, top to bottom. And until we have that, it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, and I want to just touch on a point you made. One of the things that I've seen in my years at the Foreign Service is the statistics for, so the first issue that you touched upon was, recruiting in diverse, people with diverse backgrounds into the Foreign Service. But then when you're in, you look at the statistics, and we get promotion statistics every year, and you look at those, and to me, they're almost misleading in a way, because the percentages are what people focus on, right? So let's say 40% of Hispanic Foreign Service officers were promoted, but there are only 8. So, I feel like we have to do better internally also to caveat the statistics and to say we need to improve upon this, and this is not reflective of what we define as diversity. I'll turn it quickly to Tiaji and Aaron. Do you have similar types of issues internally in the MFA, or are you guys all good?
To be honest, I think we're not even there yet. We're not even at a point where we could say, well, you know, this is what things look like. You're all acquainted with German culture, so you know that there's many things that we don't like to measure or count.
Right.
And that includes actually, you know, you were mentioning that before, it's like social background, religious affiliations, and it also includes everything that has to do with your ethnic background. So what people who are criticizing our approach are saying in our system is that, oh, well, you know, we really don't want to look at that because we are colorblind, religion blind, we're just blind to all these things. So it's just, you know, for the best to really come through the system. And so this is one of the big goals that we have, that we really want to actually find a situation in our government institutions that we actually can look at the facts and then say, okay, what are the statistics? And then the second step will be that we'll start criticizing the statistics.
Right. Well, you have to. At some point, you have to, right? You always
We do
to
have very good
criticize.
news. I mean, if you look at the current coalition administration in Germany, the new government, in the coalition treaty, it actually says we want a coherent and overarching diversity strategy for the federal government institutions, which is
Right.
actually something that DOC has been, you know, promoting for a year, more or less, I would say, and we're very happy that it actually came through and that this is now an official government line and project. So we're quite optimistic about it. And the good news is that the Federal Foreign Office is the first ministry that actually has a diversity strategy ready. It's going to be launched very soon, and then we'll also, of course, be supportive and critical in the implementation of this strategy. And before Tiaji can also add more points, I actually have one quick question to you guys. So how does it work in the State Department in the selection process? Do you actually have an auditing in place? Can you make sure there is no unconscious bias? Because this is one of the major. Okay. I can read your mind. Yeah. So this is one of the major obstacles that we still see in our system. So number one is, as Latifa was mentioning, we want to get people to actually start working at the ministry. But once they apply, we also have to make sure that they actually have, you know, every possibility to actually get in. And then once they get in, we actually want to make sure that we kind of know who's there, and we want to make sure that they don't just end up in, you know, certain levels, but that there's no glass ceiling eventually, but they can actually really, you know, rise the ranks if they're good. So
Yeah.
that's
I'll let you guys answer that question, but I just want to say one thing about why this is important, because it's curious to me, because we all live in democracies. And we have institutions that are saying we do not want to be transparent. And
Yeah.
but this is why it's important, again, that you have people who bring these different perspectives to remind people, really, we are citizens of democracies. We promote transparency. Yet, in our own internal processes, we're saying we don't want to be transparent because it might cause what? Ill feelings or discomfort. But that's okay. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to discuss these and figure out what's the optimal solution to resolve that issue. And so that's one of the things I tell people is important for us to reflect on. Go back to basic principles. Go back to first principles. We are a democracy. We are about transparency. We are about inclusion. That's what we are, giving people a voice. You know, that's what we have to do. And so we have to hold our institutions' feet to the fire to make sure that they do that as well.
You're going to make me go down the rabbit hole of our performance valuation system when you said that. And I'm not going to do that, but I'll let Carly answer our own question. I have some answers too, but.
Yeah, I think it's no secret that it's something that we struggle with as well. Not only in the process of recruiting and people entering, but then, as Salman is referring to, also in how people can rise up the ranks, because we don't have a system, a evaluation system in which you can 100% sort of remove those unconscious bias. And it's because, as the CG was saying, you know, you kind of have the department going back and forth, that we need, all of us, I think, to take the steps to institutionalize these principles as much as we can so that it's not dependent upon the person of the day, of the hour, or what is trendy. This is about the long term. So making sure that we have processes in place to capture the data. So like you said, do we know who's there that we need to make sure that we're taking care of so we don't lose them? We don't have that right now, unfortunately. Do we have a promotion and evaluation system that keeps people accountable for what they're doing to further these principles, again, in the long term, not just today because it's the flavor of today and we have, someone in charge who values that. No, but over the long term so that the department can actually change its culture. And I think this does take kind of, accumulation of baby steps all together to change culture over time. And the people who've come before us have helped us with that, but there's still a lot of work to do.
Latifa.
And I also think, like Darion said, there needs to be some sort of consistency. I'll tell you, when I came in, I didn't hear anything about diversity and inclusion like I have in the last 2 years. I didn't even know that anything like that existed. So if we're to move past where we are, there has to be some consistency on the part of our institution, and we all have a part to play to make sure that this happens. Yes, we have the recruiting events, but then when people come in, what happens, And this is where the coaching, the teaching, the mentoring comes in. And, we live in a very, digital world right now. Just because you're not in the same place with somebody doesn't mean that you can't mentor them. So at least that's how I deal with these issues. But that has to continue, So while the institution is doing its own thing, we also need to be doing ours as individuals, and then hopefully we'll be able to give a voice to those people, because when we talk about inclusion, if you're not given an opportunity to voice your opinion, there is no inclusion, So you have to be given that opportunity, and sometimes that is lacking a lot of times. It's like you don't even get near the table before you can even say something. You have to be there and you have to have that audience. And so what ends up happening, at least in my specialties, we lose a lot of people, People get tired and they say, you know what, I'm done, I'm moving on. So that's what's going to keep happening. And, I hope that as we go on, yes, the institution has its own part to play, but we also as individuals, we have ours.
Yeah. Tiaji, I think you wanted to add something.
Yes, I actually wanted to add something towards what Carly has said. I think the aspect of cultural change is also very significant in Germany, especially considering that there's quite a strong skepticism about anything that's perceived as foreign. And I think we, with Diplomats of Color, really want to change that narrative and kind of show that multiculturalism is actually a benefit for promoting German interests abroad when it comes to, for example, being exposed to multiple cultures at home, being exposed to multiple languages, and that can be actually used to the benefit of our country. And I think that's something that we're really trying to put forward to kind of counterbalance the skepticism that still exists.
Yeah. I want to go back to what you said when you mentioned unconscious bias, and I'd taken a note in what Carly was saying about answering your question. There are certain things that we can do to improve our systems, and as Carly said, we can change our performance system or whatever it is, but we're limited in that capacity as well, right? So I think the key to unconscious bias is training people to, and not just once, take one course and you're done. It's got to be continuous learning on how to eliminate unconscious bias, right? Because you can't fully eliminate it, but you can recognize it. And as you were saying, as individuals, it is our duty to recognize when we are committing a bias. And that takes learning. And so I think we can talk all day about the issues with our systems, but until from the top down, we have people who can recognize the bias and then, address it, we're really not going to fix anything.
Well, and I was just going to say, and here's where statistics come into play. Here's what we learned. When we looked at the statistics, we actually discovered that when people enter, so our system is you start at grade 5, then go to a 4, a 3 for generalist foreign service officer. You start at a 5, go to a 4, a 3, a 2, a 1, and then senior foreign service. Okay, here's what we discovered. 5, 4, 3, almost no issue at all. People were being promoted at the same rate. There were no issues that we could point to. Everything was negligible. At a 2, we saw that those that from historically underrepresented groups would stay at a 2 for long periods of time, well longer than the average. Well, someone who knows the system and is paying attention would say, that's right about the time where it's no longer, your promotions are no longer based upon your performance, but also who you know. Because at that level, it's also being able to get the recommendations from senior people to say, oh, Darion's good at this, and I really would like to see him in a senior position. And they have to advocate for you. They have to be, a supporter of you. And it was right there at that level that you saw underrepresented groups just stay there for a long time, and many people they quit at that level. And then the department would say, well, that's not our fault, they left. Say, but why did they leave? Right. And so this is the reason why I also say that it's very important that we do this with intentionality, that when we look at that's an argument for looking at unconscious bias. Are there things, I don't think that people necessarily intend to do these things, but when you look at them writ large and you look at all the data and you get the statistics, and it reveals certain information, and then you can tackle it. And that's what we have to be intentional about.
I agree. To overcome unconscious bias, it takes learning, training, but it also takes bravery, because there's a lot of stigma. I mean, ultimately we're talking about the omnipresent racism that is in all societies of this planet. It's present. It's a fact. I do believe that not only in Germany, but especially in Germany, this term is very stigmatized. So if you're telling somebody, I think that remark was racist, they might actually feel ashamed, they might feel attacked, and they might react in a way saying, how dare you, I'm not a racist, and why do you tell me that, and are you trying to offend me? So you really need to actually sit down and tell people, you need to just get this into your sphere of consciousness, to think about it and to learn from it, and then you just start this process. But it takes a lot of bravery, and I think that this is a societal process that is still far from the goal that I have for Western societies.
Okay. Just want to make sure no one else had to add anything there. I want to talk about a little bit about what we can do, right? So we've talked about the issues, we've talked a bit about what needs to be done, but what can we do? Going back to Latifa and saying individuals have a responsibility. We started we've got them all over the world now at embassies and the State Department, what we call diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility councils. And these are employee-driven. So employees, any employee, whether they're part of the State Department or local staff like Jamal, or family members, they can start these councils. And the idea is everything we've talked about, right? The goals are everything we've talked about. I guess my question to everyone would be, what is the next step? So we started these councils, we've started having these conversations, we're having open conversations, we're advocating with our organizations. we're even doing outreach to our host country, colleagues. But what is the next step to institutionalize this, regardless of, what the political landscape is, and to take that next step to make it real, I guess, and to see results and to have statistics also, right? So we can say, here are the results.
I can tell you another story, and I have to be careful on this. But I think we have lost the ability to make sure that we act with integrity, and I don't mean that as an offensive term. Here's my story. I was in a position, and I was a supervisor. My position was ranked higher than the person I supervised. But we were actually the same grade. We were the same rank. We were both up for promotion. So it presented the possibility where this individual could have been promoted above me, although I would have been their boss. And I was surprised because my supervisor came to me and said, I had recommended this person for promotion. And my supervisor came and said, are you sure you want to do that? And I said, well, why wouldn't I do that? They have done an outstanding job. They are worthy of promotion. No, I stand by my statement. No, I'm recommending this individual for promotion. But you realize that they may get promoted and you may not be promoted. And that's going to create an awkward situation for you. Yeah, but I can handle it. I can deal with it. I mean, I'm still going to be the supervisor. It doesn't change anything. It's that kind of thinking where if I had felt I would have been disadvantaged had this person been promoted and I wasn't promoted, then it causes me to behave in a way that acts against my institutional responsibilities. And that's what I wanted to make sure that I didn't do. Luckily, this story ended well. We were both promoted. But this is what I mean. You have to, with our responsibilities, institutional responsibilities, you have to act with integrity. You cannot personally take it and say that, well, this is going to be horrible for me, or this won't work for me, or this is going to disadvantage me. We have to think about the institution and what's my role within the institution and not violate the principles of the position or the role that you're assuming.
Yeah. And we are a very rank-conscious organization, right? So I have a story about that, but I don't know if I want to say that. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and I think what Latifah touched on earlier when it comes to recruiting, I mean, that's ultimately how I ended up in the military and starting my path. They look at you and, are you even going to look at that table when you see that it clearly looks a certain way? She mentioned at the very beginning, if I have no recollection, at least at the school level, the high school level, of any kind of foreign service, or if they even present themselves in that sphere the same way a military recruiter would come around and make themselves present. Or if that's something that should be created where they can say, you know what, let's start to go to some of these communities where, it doesn't look, like the majority, and make themselves a little more present and see what kind of people are interested and who they can give a chance to. Because, sometimes it's as simple as seeing it. Because if you don't see it, you're not really going to gravitate towards it. So I think that representation is big. And, coming into the State Department for the first time, coming from the Marines and the military, which is very diverse, and then you go into the State Department, I did see that right away, that I was like, okay, there's only a few of us here, but I mean, it's a conscious thing in my brain as a black individual to see, how many people are here that kind of look like me. It's an unconscious effort. And of course, when you do put it into perspective and we're sitting down having these conversations, it's for a reason. So I think it really starts at that foundation of representation and recruiting. to really start getting us in the right direction. And more people see it, more people hear about it, more people are becoming more activated. So,
Jamal, how do you think, is it possible to convey this kind of experience to people who are not BIPOC themselves, to actually say this is something that I immediately felt when I walked in through the door? How can you make them understand that this is a kind of an experience? Because this is one of the challenges that we see. So we talk a lot with all our colleagues, but I also kind of I'm under the impression that it's a certain layer of our foreign service, and that there's still, something else there to the iceberg that we don't know really how to address people and also discuss with them about these issues. Any suggestions?
So, I mean, the way the recruiters would do it, I'm not sure how they do it at the universities. I'm sure they do something a little similar for different professions. They set up their booths. Now, I don't know how legal that is in Germany in terms of if certain professions would be invited to schools to promote said profession. That would be the first step, is just creating that visibility. Yeah. Oh, what's this guy doing here during our break? What kind of brochures does he have or she have? To just provide, again, that visibility of, oh, what's that, and of course the people who are getting closer to the end of their, high school years, are going to start looking into these things naturally, if they're not already going to the university path and they're fixed on that and more focused on that. But there are a lot of people who aren't, like myself, was not looking at the university direction due to my C's, and had to say, okay, school's not an option right now, but I need to do something. So what can I do? And you take what you can get in that sense, and it also lays on that person there to kind of sell themselves in a way that interests you or sparks your curiosity. So there's no one way to do it, but I think the visibility is a big beginning.
Tiaji, did you want to add something? You've been nodding in agreement. So.
Yes, I am. I just want to raise another point. I think critics often say that minorities or marginalized communities shouldn't have an unfair advantage when it comes to actually getting into jobs. And I think, this is not what all of us are saying. I think this is quite clear to me. I think the point really is to actually expanding the pool of applicants and seeing how can we attract the best talents for the foreign service, for the public service, instead of, let's say, them going to the private sector. And I think this also needs to be embedded into a broader policy framework when it comes, for example, to equal access to education, because obviously as a foreign service officer, you need to be highly educated, but going forward or looking down, are people of color actually, do they have the same advantage to actually access higher education? So I think when it comes to representation in the foreign service, I think this also we kind of need to look at the bigger picture here to avoid kind of this critical backlash of unfair advantage.
Yeah, I think, you hit it spot on. I think the message is not that it's an unfair advantage, it's that people are seeking equality, right? So equity. We want to be seen on the same, spectrum as everybody. We want to be evaluated on the same scale, and I think it goes back to unconscious bias again. That it's not easy to do that when there is a level of unconscious bias, and I think recruiting wise, we don't do a great job of going into the communities that are underrepresented. We've started to have these diplomats in residence who are now, at historically black universities and colleges, but it's 2022. Not to say that, we're ahead of our time, right?
We're getting our first female ambassador
right.
here.
That's right. Yeah, first female ambassador to Germany. So, anyway,
I was
go
just
ahead.
really quick.
Go ahead.
just one more story, because it's not just about what we do today. I'll tell you the whole reason why I ended up in the Foreign Service, and it was completely by coincidence, because I had never heard of the Foreign Service growing up, never in my life. I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and I got to know this gentleman who worked at the embassy, and after he got to know me, he said, "Hey, have you ever thought about joining the Foreign Service?" And it's like, what's that? And he explained, and on that day, he planted a seed. It did not germinate because I was young, full of vim and vigor. I don't have time for that. I got other priorities. And it wasn't until almost 4 years later when I was thinking about, well, I want to get married, and I was like, well, then that would require a career. What do I want to do? And then that seed that he had planted germinated. And so we don't have to only think about here in the here and now. When we're out in our communities, when we go home to the people that we know, we can talk about, see people who you think would have the talent for doing this. In my particular case, it was my personality that he thought would acclimate me well to becoming a Foreign Service officer. But when we see that in individuals, encourage them, because maybe they don't know. I mean, I had no idea about being a Foreign Service officer, so I try to do that now. I try to do that now when I go out and I meet people and I see that they have a certain talent that I think could be utilized by the Foreign Service. I would encourage them and then talk to them about the path to join the Foreign Service. And that could be in a number of fields within the Foreign Service, because we have many different fields.
And also instilling a sense of service, right?
Yep.
So not just the glamour that comes with this job. Which, that was
Which one?
sarcasm. If you didn't notice that, I want to make sure we have time for questions. So if there are any questions on Facebook or YouTube, we can take those.
Well, there are not many questions. There are more remarks and comments.
Okay. Well then,
I don't know. Do we want to hear?
well, we can keep
Transparency,
talking. And
transparency.
If any questions come up, you can just flag those for us. But we can keep talking for a few minutes. I don't want to.
Well, I can go
Yeah.
back to something you raised earlier, the question about, what can we do as individuals? And I wish that the list was short, but I think that unfortunately there's a lot of work to be done, and I think that list is probably without end on a daily basis. I think we face decisions much like the one you described about, promoting your colleague or not, that require integrity, but are also important in terms of upholding the principles of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And so I think, it's great that we've got the councils. A good news story also is that on our side, we have now at the senior Foreign Service, 7th floor, highest ranks of the Foreign Service, a chief diversity officer and a strategy that is being rolled out, if you will, for embassies to look at and across the department. It's different bureaus and departments to utilize as a roadmap. But at the end of the day, each individual has a responsibility to make decisions based on these principles. And, in that sense, I think the opportunities are endless.
Yeah.
There's a new program that we came up with at Diplomats of Color, which is that, we've been discussing the Foreign Service perspective, the generalist perspective, people who live somewhere as expats, but for us in our service, we're very small compared to the US service. No, we're 12,000 in the world, out of which 6,000 are actually locally hired staff. And especially, when you look at societies, Western societies, I'll call it that, you actually see that in many places also our local colleagues, the way we hire them, doesn't necessarily reflect the diversity of the place. And this is something that we also want to actually, we want to raise the awareness for that fact, because I think that's really something that not only our ambassadors abroad can look into, but actually the many people who are abroad serving at a mission and are involved in the staffing process. So I don't know if that's also a topic for the...
Absolutely.
All right, okay.
Absolutely.
So then, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Top of the list.
It's
Okay, all
actually,
right.
I'll tell you a quick one. When I first, my first assignment actually incidentally happened to be Nigeria, so go figure. And I remember the ambassador we had then, she's retired now. When she arrived, one of the first things, because you know Nigeria is quite multi-ethnic. I mean, there's a lot of ethnicities. And it was the federal capital, so you would think there would be like good representation all across. And the first thing she noticed, because you could tell by names, right? She would ask, so what part of the country are you from? So it was almost like there was a cartel of a certain part of the country, predominantly at the embassy. And she's like, you know, we're Americans, we're all about being fair, and we want to see the same thing happen here at the embassy. And, you know, before we knew what was going on, the HR section was revamped, you know, and there were new people selected to help with the selection process. Because when you put out an application in those places, you get like 1,200 applicants, you know. And so it worked, you know. It was a conscious, intentional effort. I would say that while she was there, things may not have gotten 100% better, but things changed. And that's the same thing that we can apply, I mean, as diplomats representing the United States. If things are to change, each one of us, I keep saying that, has to own it, you know. And I like the example that Darion also gave about you and your colleague. Sometimes people of color may not do such a good job because they want to rise. That should not be the focus, you know. You want to rise, but you also want to represent, okay? So we should all have equal opportunities. You don't want a situation where some people feel like because you're a person of color, you're in that position because we needed to put somebody of color or a different, you know, ethnicity to fill that position so we can count you as part of the quarter. I'm like, no. If I'm there, I want to do the best that I can. I want to represent well. I want people to look at me and say, okay, so we had this person there and he or she did a good job. I think, you know, we can expand the opportunities for others. So that's what I like to see, because whether we like it or not, people will be people, you know? And so we always have to remember that at the back of our mind.
Well, Latifa, I can so much relate to what you said about Lagos. I was serving there, and it was a great posting. And surprisingly, that is the one mission where I was actually working that has the most diverse local staff. The interesting thing is that most of my German colleagues, they have no clue. They don't know. But it's actually one of the missions where we have lots of people who are not only Nigerian, but we have Beninois, we have Togolese colleagues there. But it just, you know, it tells you, it gives you the kind of the context if you then realize that most of the people who come from Germany and who work at what is now our Consul General there, they don't know. They don't see the diversity.
You touched on something, and you did with your story, that I just want to quickly follow up on with a story I have, but on, you know, performing, and if you perform, you should be rewarded for that. And you mentioned, I think it was your supervisor who was questioning you recommending this counterpart for promotion. I experienced the exact opposite, where, you know, I was in a kind of a temporary position. And I was supervising people that outranked me. And the person in charge purposely did that. And I asked him about it, and he said, the reason I'm doing this is because you've been here from day one, and you understand everything, and you have the skills. And there's no time to train someone. So you're going to be in charge when I leave. And I thought to myself that, you know, we're rank conscious, as I said, but I thought to myself, this is refreshing that all he was looking at was skills and performance, and he didn't care about any of the other stuff, and he made it very clear. So I think, you know, it can go either way.
Yeah.
And I think we have to look at rewarding performance regardless of what the name is or the gender is, or whether you have the connections and you've networked, all those things. So
No, I absolutely 100% agree, but it also requires us to have a thoughtful conversation about what a job requires,
Right.
which is what we are not willing to do very often.
yeah.
And I don't have a good example for this, but just simply, we run into these issues where you try and make the qualifications higher than they need to be in order to accomplish the job. So we keep saying, well, if you had a bachelor's degree, yeah, you're good. If you have a master's degree, you'd be better. If you have a doctorate, you'd be the best. Really? Does that have anything to do with your ability or this individual's ability to do the job? That's what you have to question, and that's the conversation we have to have.
Yeah.
And so I agree. Whoever that supervisor was did the right thing.
Yeah. Any questions?
Yes.
Okay, we have a question. We'll take a quick question. Yeah, I can read it. Okay. Besides the DEIA internal council, are there any other measures to ensure the diversification of the staff at the Department of State? Are there internal obligatory trainings for staff members to address and break down biases? And are there any people of color staff who experience discrimination? I need to paraphrase because the way it's written. Are there any people of color as staff who experience discrimination and who we can turn to? And finally, do both the Department of State and the Auswärtiges Amt work with organizations who focus on biases in recruitment to decrease biases in their application processes? So let's start at the top, and maybe Carly, you can answer that one. Are there any other measures to ensure the diversification of staff at the Department of State other than DEI councils?
Mm-hmm. Well, as I mentioned, the State Department has a few fellowships, not just the Pickering Fellowship. There are several that are focused on specifically the diversity in recruitment. We mentioned the Diplomat in Residence program, which I think is also really important in terms of active and intentional outreach to different parts of our country, because, as Darion said, do you know what the Foreign Service is typically growing up in rural America or really any part? I mean, unless you know someone who, has been in the Foreign Service or maybe sort of in touch with an embassy because of the military nexus or something like that, it's difficult to become aware. And I think there's where the universities have to play a large role in educating students about this as a career option or about the fellowships as a pathway into this career option. So those are a few, I would say, other than the DEIA. And I don't think we should rely only on this initiative, this movement, I would call it, that we have right now. I think it's great that we have it, but it shouldn't be limited, let's say, to one office or a few persons and positions within the bureaus to focus on these principles.
Yeah. The other question was, are there any internal obligatory trainings for staff members to address and break down biases? I mentioned unconscious bias. That is actually now obligatory. It's required course that we have to take at the Department of State. It's online, but I know there are the Foreign Service Institute or Training Institute also offers virtual, in-person type unconscious bias training. So we have those. And the one about turning to someone who's experienced discrimination, I would answer that in a way that, so one, we want to do open conversations. We want to have open conversations with our staff and our community members, And I think those are opportunities. It's not recorded. It's not on YouTube. It's a private kind of internal discussion where you can hear from people and you can turn to them. But if you're not comfortable with that, then obviously you can always go to your EEO counselor or someone like that and talk to them. And then
if I can add to that a little bit, there are some stories that are just now widely known, and I think they have helped to kind of add to this conversation about what the responsibilities of the institution are to the employees who are facing this discrimination. Earlier today, there was a session for several diversity and inclusion councils in the State Department on this topic. And I think it became clear in that conversation that hearing those stories, the fact that they became public and widely known, helped to spur more movement within these councils. In the case of one of our bureaus, really, it was what got it started because it happened in that bureau. And people said, that's unacceptable, they recognize it, let's acknowledge this, and let's commit to addressing it. So I think it's an important point that you raise, the fact that there are people experiencing this within our organization. Sharing their stories can also be an important part of the process to remedy these issues.
Yeah, and I'll let you and Tiaji answer the last question because it's addressed to both our organizations. But do both the Department of State and Auswärtiges Amt work with organizations who focus on biases in recruitment to decrease biases in their application processes?
Tiaji, do you want to answer that?
I'm honestly not sure whether the foreign ministry is doing it, but we as Diplomats of Color are definitely working with outside organizations to address many of these issues. But Aaron, maybe you know more about the Foreign Service official position.
It's one of these big chunks right there in the diversity strategy that we have now. Okay. So. It's something that's not very common so far in Germany. Universities do it a lot. They have, there's a big foundation. They actually offer some sort of auditing also for unconscious bias. And so I'm quite confident that we're going to get there soon.
Yeah. Well, I think there was this question at the top, again, about training, what training looks like in the State Department or the Auswärtiges Amt, and who is doing the professional development / trainings. So for us, again, the training is, the official training is done by the Foreign Service Institute, but these councils are now offering sessions that you could call training. They're learning sessions, right? And we hope to do the same here in Berlin, where we're going to actually bring in outside experts, coaches, whatever you want to call them, who have done this for their entire career, and have them lead discussions and do trainings. So I don't know if you guys are instituting it in your training center.
Pretty much the same thing. So the onboarding, so the initial training is done by the Federal Foreign Service Academy. Yeah. And they started 2 years ago, I think, was the first time that they actually included it. We have a multi-tier system. We have 3 different entry levels, probably would call them. And so we started in 2 of those already, and now they want to also expand it to all 3. It's just, one small part of the training, but that's a start. And so what we're currently trying to do is that we actually get these kind of trainings, including the one on unconscious bias, into the syllabus of our training unit. Okay. So we have the concept; it's right there, and actually, Diplomats of Color also submitted a little list with people and organizations who could actually take over and come as external partners to then offer this kind of training.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, I don't want to keep you guys all night. We could keep talking for hours. I just want to quickly open it up to anyone on the panel that wants to give some final thoughts. And if not, I can always give them.
Well, I do, if I may.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
No. I think it is important. As I said, I've been in the Foreign Service for 20 years. And of course, throughout those 20 years, things have occurred where I've been disappointed. And I am optimistic by nature, but I also believe that that's fundamentally the way we need to be. Have our eyes fixed on the future, thinking that things will get better, and here's why. Because I'm intending on them to be better. And think about what role I can play, how I can participate, how I can contribute to make things the way that I think they should be. I am not naive enough to think that I can do all of that on my own and put it all on my shoulders. I can't. It is working with people, like my colleagues here on this panel and others within the embassy and within the mission to make that happen. But I think it's really important, and this is the point I really want to make. If you get discouraged, just take a moment and gather yourself and remember why we're doing this, why we chose to become diplomats. It is about serving our fellow citizens, it's about serving our country, but it's also trying to do good in the world. And that is something to be proud of, and that is something to be optimistic about. And so that is the world. There are always going to be challenges. It is not about how many times you fall, it's about how many times you get up.
Thank you. All right, if no one has anything else, then I'll close it. I want to thank all of you for being here, and Tiaji, thank you for being with us online. Really appreciate your time, and hopefully we will do this more often and have more discussions and be able to talk about what we've accomplished as well. So thank you, everyone.
March 30th.
Yeah, and I'm being told I have to make an announcement again that I made at the top, but I will make it again. On March 30th, the embassy will be hosting a virtual discussion with our Chief Diversity Officer from the State Department, Ambassador Abercrombie Winstanley. So tune into that. And thank you, everyone, and thank you to all our support staff who've made this happen.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you.